The morning briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-deployment tension. Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform and took her position among the other officers, her boots silent against the polished floor. She had learned long ago that being the only woman in these rooms meant every movement was scrutinized, every word weighed differently. General Harrison strode in with his typical commanding presence, his chest heavy with ribbons that told stories of decades in combat zones. His eyes swept the room with practiced authority before settling on the tactical display board. "The mission parameters are straightforward," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We need precise coordination between ground units and air support in Sector 7. This operation requires the kind of specialized knowledge that takes years to develop." Sarah listened intently, her trained mind already processing the tactical implications. She noticed the subtle details others missed, the way the general's fingers unconsciously traced patterns that spoke of classified protocols, the careful emphasis he placed on certain geographical markers. "Where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there?" She found herself thinking about all the service members around the globe who understood this moment, this familiar dance of military precision and unspoken hierarchies. General Harrison continued his briefing, his pointer tapping against the map with sharp precision. "The reconnaissance data shows enemy positions here and here," he said, marking red X's across the terrain. "Standard infantry approaches won't work. We need someone who understands advanced infiltration techniques." Sarah studied the topographical details, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors and extraction routes that weren't immediately obvious. The terrain reminded her of places she had been, missions she couldn't discuss, skills she had honed in shadows that most of these officers would never see. "Captain Martinez," the general said suddenly, his tone carrying a hint of dismissal, "you'll coordinate supply logistics from base camp. Leave the tactical planning to those with the proper training." The other officers nodded in agreement, their assumptions as solid as the concrete walls around them. Sarah simply responded with a quiet "yes sir," her voice steady and professional. She had learned that arguing rarely changed minds, but demonstration always did. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where people underestimated your capabilities based on their first impression? She wondered silently, knowing that somewhere out there, others had walked this same path of quiet patience and hidden strength. The general turned back to his map, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath Captain Martinez's calm exterior. The briefing continued as General Harrison outlined the mission's complexity. "These enemy positions are heavily fortified," he explained, his weathered face serious. "They've anticipated standard military responses. What we need is someone with specialized training in unconventional warfare." Major Thompson leaned forward, his special forces tab gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Sir, my team has experience with similar terrain. We could execute a night insertion using standard halo techniques." Sarah remained silent, but her fingers unconsciously moved in a subtle pattern against her leg. The motion was barely perceptible, a habit formed through countless hours of specialized training that went far beyond what anyone in this room suspected. General Harrison shook his head at Thompson's suggestion. "The drop zone is too hot for conventional approaches. We need someone who's trained in advanced tactical insertion methods. The kind of skills they only teach in certain programs." His eyes swept the room dismissively, lingering on Sarah for just a moment before moving on. "Unfortunately, we don't have access to that level of expertise in our current roster." Sarah felt the familiar weight of underestimation settling around her like an old coat. She had worn it so many times before, in so many similar rooms, with so many men who saw only what they expected to see rather than what stood before them. The discussion grew more heated as officers debated approach strategies. Colonel Williams suggested aerial bombardment, while Lieutenant Davis advocated for armored advancement. Each proposal was met with General Harrison's increasingly frustrated rejections. "None of you understand the complexity here," the general said, his voice rising with exasperation. "This isn't some textbook operation. The enemy has anti-aircraft capabilities that would neutralize standard air support. Their positioning eliminates conventional ground approaches." Sarah watched the tactical display, her trained eye identifying vulnerabilities that the others missed entirely. She could see the solution clearly, an approach that would require skills most people didn't even know existed. Her breathing remained controlled, a discipline learned through years of missions that officially never happened. Major Thompson tried again. "Sir, if we coordinate with naval support and create a diversion on the eastern flank, we might be able to." "Absolutely not," Harrison interrupted. "That approach would expose our forces unnecessarily. What we need is precision insertion capability. The kind of advanced techniques that take years of specialized training to master." His frustration was palpable now, filling the room like smoke. Sarah could feel the weight of every assumption, every dismissal, every moment when her true capabilities had been overlooked because they didn't fit the expected package. General Harrison's patience had reached its breaking point. He slammed his pointer against the tactical board, the sharp crack echoing through the silence. "Listen carefully, all of you. This mission requires knowledge of classified insertion protocols. The kind of training that's restricted to elite special operations units." He turned toward the assembled officers, his eyes hard with the weight of decades commanding lesser-trained personnel. "I'm talking about techniques that only Navy SEALs and similar Tier 1 operators even know exist. Advanced hand signals for silent communication in hostile territory." Sarah's pulse quickened slightly, though her expression remained perfectly neutral. She recognized the territory he was entering, the dangerous ground where assumptions would soon collide with reality. The general continued, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "There are specific tactical hand signals used exclusively by Special Operations Forces. Signals that coordinate precision strikes, identify targets, and communicate complex tactical information without a single sound." He paused dramatically, scanning the room. "These aren't the basic signals you learned in officer training. I'm talking about classified communication protocols that take months of intensive training to master. What situations have you witnessed where someone's hidden expertise completely surprised everyone around them?" Sarah found herself thinking, knowing that moment was rapidly approaching for this very room. The general's voice took on an almost lecturing tone as he continued his explanation. "For example," he said, raising his hand in a specific configuration, "this signal indicates immediate extraction required." His fingers moved in precise patterns that spoke of years of specialized training. "Only operators who've completed the most advanced special warfare courses would recognize this," he explained, demonstrating another complex hand position. "These signals can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." Sarah watched each gesture with the kind of recognition that comes from muscle memory, from countless hours of training in facilities that didn't appear on any official maps. Her own hands remained still, but every fiber of her being understood the language he was speaking. Major Thompson squinted at the demonstrations, clearly struggling to follow the complexity. "Sir, are these the same signals used by Delta Force and other special mission units?" "Exactly," Harrison replied with satisfaction. "The same protocols used by our most elite warriors. Communication so specialized that even experienced infantry officers wouldn't recognize them." His eyes swept the room again, landing briefly on Sarah with the same dismissive glance as before. "Unfortunately, without access to personnel with that level of training, we're operating at a significant disadvantage. How many times do we underestimate the depth of experience sitting right in front of us?" Sarah wondered silently. General Harrison's demonstration grew more elaborate as he showed increasingly complex signal combinations. "This sequence," he said, his hands moving in fluid patterns, "indicates coordinated sniper overwatch with simultaneous ground advancement. Only the most elite units would ever encounter these protocols." The other officers watched with a mixture of awe and confusion, clearly out of their depth. Sarah observed with the kind of stillness that comes from years of operational discipline, her breathing controlled and steady. The general's voice carried growing frustration. "What we need for this mission is someone who doesn't just understand these signals, but who can execute them under extreme pressure. Someone with the kind of training that transforms theory into instinct." He paused, his weathered face reflecting decades of command decisions. "Unfortunately, that level of expertise is extraordinarily rare. These skills are restricted to operators who've earned their place through the most demanding selection processes in military history. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, perhaps we could request special operations support from another command." Harrison shook his head firmly. "Not available for this timeline. We're working with current personnel only." Sarah felt the familiar weight of moment approaching, when silence would no longer serve the mission. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone overlooks, she thought, knowing her time for revelation was drawing near. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. General Harrison stood before the tactical display, his frustration evident in every line of his posture. Without proper special operations expertise, this mission becomes exponentially more dangerous, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. Major Thompson cleared his throat hesitantly. "Sir, what if we modified the approach to use more conventional tactics that our current personnel can execute effectively?" Harrison's response was immediate and sharp. "Conventional tactics will get our people killed, Major. The enemy is expecting standard military responses. What we need is the element of surprise that only comes from advanced special warfare techniques." Sarah felt the familiar stirring of operational instinct, the recognition that silence was no longer serving anyone's interests. Her years of training had taught her to read situations with precision, to identify the exact moment when action became necessary. The general continued his frustrated monologue. "These hand signals I've been demonstrating represent just the surface level of what true special operations training encompasses. The men and women who master these techniques undergo selection processes that eliminate 90% of candidates." He gestured toward the empty air, unaware that his audience included someone who had not only survived those selection processes but had excelled beyond most expectations. General Harrison's voice grew more emphatic as his frustration peaked. "The level of training I'm describing doesn't exist in regular military channels," he said, his hands cutting through the air for emphasis. "We're talking about operators who've completed programs so classified that most military personnel don't even know they exist." The room fell into uncomfortable silence as the weight of the impossible mission settled over everyone present. Sarah could feel the moment crystallizing, the precise instant when continued silence would become a disservice to everyone in that room. Colonel Williams attempted one last suggestion. "Sir, perhaps if we delayed the mission timeline to request proper special operations support." "Absolutely not," Harrison snapped. "Intelligence indicates the window closes within 72 hours. We execute with current personnel or we don't execute at all." His eyes swept the room one final time, settling briefly on each officer before moving on. "What I wouldn't give for just one person in this room who actually understood what I'm talking about," he muttered, his voice heavy with resignation. Sarah felt every muscle in her body preparing for action, every instinct honed through years of impossible missions awakening simultaneously. The moment of truth had arrived, and silence was no longer an option that served anyone's interests, least of all the success of the mission itself. Sarah stood slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. The room's attention shifted toward her as she rose from her chair with the kind of fluid precision that spoke of years beyond regular military training. General Harrison looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Captain Martinez, unless you have supply logistics questions, I don't have time for interruptions." Sarah's response came not in words, but in action. Her hands moved with lightning precision into a complex sequence that made the general's earlier demonstrations look elementary. The signals flowed together in combinations that spoke of advanced tactical coordination, enemy position identification, and strike authorization protocols. The general's expression transformed from irritation to shock, then to something approaching disbelief. His mouth opened slightly as he recognized not just the signals themselves, but the flawless execution that could only come from extensive operational experience. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Those are Tier 1 classified protocols. Only operators with the highest security clearances would even know those exist." Sarah continued her demonstration, her hand speaking a language that told stories of missions conducted in shadows, of selections survived and operations completed that would never appear in official records. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's true expertise completely transformed everyone's understanding? She thought as the room fell into stunned silence. The silence in the room was deafening as General Harrison stared at Sarah with complete bewilderment. "Captain," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "where exactly did you learn those signals?" Sarah's response was calm and professional. "Special Activities Division, sir. 6 years operational deployment in classified theaters. Advanced Tactical Communications was part of my core training alongside direct action and unconventional warfare." The general's face went through a series of expressions as the implications sank in. Major Thompson's jaw had dropped completely open, while Colonel Williams sat frozen in his chair, clearly struggling to process what he had witnessed. "You're telling me," Harrison said, his voice gaining strength as understanding dawned, "that you've been sitting in my briefings for months with Tier 1 Special Operations experience and never mentioned it?" Sarah's expression remained neutral. "Sir, my current assignment is supply logistics coordination. My previous experience wasn't relevant to those duties until this moment." The general ran his hand through his gray hair, clearly overwhelmed by the revelation. "Special Activities Division doesn't just hand out assignments, Captain. What was your operational specialty?" "Direct action operations with emphasis on precision target elimination and advanced reconnaissance," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "This is exactly the kind of moment that reminds us why we should never underestimate the people around us," she reflected as the room's entire dynamic shifted. General Harrison's entire demeanor transformed as the full weight of Sarah's revelation settled over him. "Captain Martinez," he said, his voice now carrying deep respect, "I owe you an apology. And more importantly, this mission needs your expertise." Sarah stepped forward to the tactical display, her movements now carrying the confidence of someone whose true capabilities were finally recognized. "The insertion point you've identified is problematic, sir, but there's an alternative approach that Special Operations Doctrine would recommend." Her finger traced a path across the map that none of the other officers had considered. "Advanced reconnaissance suggests a vulnerability here that conventional analysis would miss. With proper coordination signals, a small team could exploit this weakness effectively." The other officers watched in fascination as Sarah outlined a tactical approach that transformed an impossible mission into an achievable objective. Her expertise flowed naturally, revealing the depth of knowledge that had been hidden beneath assumptions and logistics assignments. General Harrison nodded slowly, his respect evident in every gesture. "Captain, I'm reassigning you as Tactical Operations Lead for this mission. Your experience is exactly what we need." As the briefing concluded with a completely different energy, Sarah reflected on how often the most qualified people in any room are the ones everyone overlooks. Sometimes the greatest strength lies hidden until the moment when silence must give way to action and expertise must finally speak.